ladies and gentlemen, it's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our guests today are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. And we have our man in Kyiv, Ivan Kucherenko. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Just kidding. Well, okay, wrong guy. Okay, I pop in first. Okay, I'm glad to be here as always, Sasha.
I announced you first anyway.
I know, yeah, that's right. I get to pop in first.
I see. Okay, so we're waiting for Ivan.
Yeah.
Hopefully he will join us.
There.
Here he
Hello,
is.
Hello gentlemen.
Ivan, do you have a video for us to watch?
Yeah, a really short one video. We can
Okay, let's do
start with
that,
it.
and then we'll have discussion.
Okay. Mark, please play the video.
Someone wake up, Mark.
People of the Russian opposition are refusing to talk about the Russian. Oh, it's only Putin. No, it's not only Putin. Because you had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Russians who were complicit to those crimes, perpetrators of those crimes, tortures, etc. It's not only Putin, and his minions. It's basically a big part of the Russian people, and many of those ones remain silent. And I think that's very important also for the future of Russia. I don't know if it will happen or not. But when we will have a Russian president, I don't know, who will say exactly the same words that Richard von Weizsäcker said in Germany in 1985, about the guilt, about, well, fortunately we have been defeated. When you will have a Russian president, fortunately we have been defeated, saying that, then, of course, I could have some hope about the future of Russia. Otherwise, never.
Well, very interesting clip. By the way, I noticed that Ukraine is taking more and more space in international coverage. It's becoming almost first-rate armed forces in the world. It's
certainly in terms of innovation. Certainly in terms of innovation.
Absolutely. So, and by the way, it's even noticed by war experts and military experts that while US and Israel are fighting the war of 20th century in Iran, the Ukraine is fighting 21st century war against Russia, and apparently it's winning this war against Russia. It's a very interesting thing. Look, Russia is a nuclear power country, and it's almost like prohibits it to use nuclear power.
Because they have no relation to their political objectives.
That's right. But you see, the all-Russian military doctrine is based, the cornerstone of the doctrine is the nuclear power. So you have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You have some probably military the flights, the other things, the artillery, you have all kind of things, but it's so like auxiliary to your centerpiece, your nuclear power, the triad, the intercontinental missiles. And they can't use it, and you can't use it, and you build your perimeter around that, which you cannot use it. You're a loser. In fact, you have no chance to win war. Forget about Ukraine, even in some kind of middle power country, even like Iran, you cannot win it. So actually, it's US in almost the same situation. It cannot use its nuclear option. And because of that, then you have to use some other stuff. But the other stuff is not so lethal. And Iranians are very inventive how to hide and how to just survive this regular attacks, which are stopped for now. There are no more regular attacks. That's it. Iran is now living its normal life. They don't scare of anything. There is no wars, there is no peace. But that's okay. It's not the first situation in a world when there is a doctrine of no war, no peace. It's even during the early days of Soviet Union against Germany, there was no war, no peace. strategy. We know what's happened after that. In any case, Ukraine is now participating in all international meetings, like today in Yerevan, and Zelensky is looked with the greatest respect. And it's not the first and probably not the last international meeting when U.S. is not participating because it has not even been invited. Nobody wants to deal with U.S. anymore. U.S. is busy now war in Iran. The next one is Cuba. Venezuela is done. Okay, so U.S. has the world of its own. So let them do whatever they want to do. But there is no place for America in the international conference when people want to coordinate its action, cooperate, and actually, our Prime Minister Carney is doing an extremely good job at these meetings. And right now, I don't want to tell you. Maybe Ivan, you will help me. What's the real situation on the front lines with Ukraine? Ukraine is doing a fantastic job of eliminating all those Russians. You know, the export of Russian oil dropped 50% after the recent Ukrainian attacks, and it will be probably even more so. And it's kind of upsets Donald Trump because of the elimination of 50% of export of Russia. Definitely doesn't lower the price of oil on the world market, which was the goal of Trump, to offset the problems with Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz, and so on. Anyway, this situation now is Zelensky is getting a great respect from all powers in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere. And U.S. is losing its position as a world leader, definitely. And Russia is losing more than anybody else, because even if it's allowed to sell its oil, it cannot deliver its oil. It doesn't have its oil. So this is becoming a really horrible situation. So Ivan, how are Ukrainian people in Kyiv, for example, where you are, viewing this present situation?
Ukrainian people are waiting what will happen on the May the 9th, actually, because Russia is planning that their traditional parade on the Red Square. This year there will be no tanks, no heavy weapons, only soldiers marching, because and the the length of that parade will be shortened because President Putin afraid that Ukraine will use the situation to attack Moscow and to make him look even more miserable in the eyes of his partners, of other dictators, in the eyes of Donald Trump, whom he wants to impress by his so-called great military achievements, which actually are not. The main focus is on that case. Actually, as we see from the news, almost every night Ukraine successfully attacks different objects in Russia. And the last night it was an attack on Udmurtia region, which is actually 1,000 miles away from Ukraine, and Ukrainian drones were able to fly all that distance from Ukrainian border to the destination in Russia, and successfully attacked the targets, the military facility, weapons manufacturing facility, and the another oil refinery. In this case, everyone is a little bit inspired, because we see the good news almost every day, and Russia is failing to grab more territories on the battlefield. They're really being slowed down, and they're not able to go through the Ukrainian wall of drones. and the number of Russians being killed per month currently is more than the number of soldiers which Russia is able to recruit, and all this it also brings a little hope that probably in the meantime Putin will be more eager to negotiate with Ukraine on some realistic options. And also there are rumors about possible coup in Russia. There are rumors that those high measures of security in Moscow are not only about the Ukrainian drones, which can just fly and attack the Red Square, but also about some Russian drones, which can be launched by the Russian elites, which are planning some kind of coup. And rumors are talking about the Shoigu, who a former Russian Minister of Defense, Minister of War, actually, that he's probably one of those Russian top oligarchs who is planning a coup against Putin. So we're just taking more patience and waiting what will happen in Russia on my 9th and on some other days, and when at least Russia will collapse. So this is the only way how this war can be ended, actually.
Jonathan, may I ask you your opinion? If Putin is so scared about possible Ukrainian attack on May 9th on its parade, why wouldn't they call something like online parade? So to show the images of their tanks.
The thing is, Sasha, images of tanks are basically all they have left. That's one reason why they're not featuring tanks and all, because most of them have been destroyed, and what few tanks they have available, they've got to have on the Ukrainian front. They can't spare anything for a parade. They don't even have that much.
What about their missiles? Maybe they can show their missiles. Just imagery, not real ones.
Again, same problem with the Ukrainians essentially being able to strike at Moscow practically at will with their drones and their homegrown produced missiles. Right now, any kind of display, it would be rather embarrassing for the Russians to hold their victory parade, and all of a sudden the Ukrainians just thoroughly disrupt it onto in front of the whole world and just bombard them, and you can see Russians fleeing Red Square, and it would be just a huge propaganda blow to Russians' illusion of trying to pretend that they are winning. And by the way, earlier, when you mentioned about Russia's forces being structured around their nuclear forces, that has been true of Russian doctrine, military doctrine, really since the 1950s.
Yeah.
When Major General Telensky stated in his statement about what became Soviet military doctrine, this first statement of it, is that he stated the principle was that we must have the ability to strike preemptive blows at all levels, strategic, operational, and tactical. And by this, the strong implication was that we have to be able to do this with nuclear weapons. Why the big emphasis on nuclear weapons? Well, as you know, the Soviet Union took staggering casualties in World War II. And this had a giant ripple effect in post-war Soviet military doctrine and formations. Many Soviet divisions were under strength. They did not mean, and a lot of their divisions were basically skeleton divisions. Just had just enough to constitute a division. It was anticipated they would flesh them out with recruits or conscripts in the event of an actual mobilization. But the Soviet Union had, for much of the Cold War, a hollow military in terms of manpower, and Khrushchev thought that the Soviet Union could make up for its lack of manpower by simply substituting nuclear firepower for the lack of manpower or the problems they're having with their demographics. And even then, that carried on right until after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Boris Yeltsin said to the Russians in a speech to the Russian Duma in 1994, said, "The only reason Russia is considered a great power is because its armed forces have nuclear weapons." That is about as frank and honest an admission, more than probably the Russian leadership wanted to admit, but that reveals the core weakness. And because it is such a narrow foundation of simple military power, that is why the Soviet leadership feared Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. They thought that according to a KGB report, the KGB report stated that the SDI program would eventually be able to block 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike. Now, whether we actually believe, few people in the West believe that, even in the U.S., but it didn't matter. The Russians believed it. They acted on that belief, and they spent themselves into bankruptcy trying to counter what was essentially a phantom strategic defense initiative, which was primarily research and development, not actual deployment. So all of this bluster regarding Russia's nuclear forces on the part of the Russian leadership, it covers up a central fear. Anything which could neutralize the effectiveness of the Russian nuclear force is to be feared, prevented, and blocked at all costs, which is why the Russians get so excited when you have President Trump talking about establishing a Golden Dome. In other words, an upgraded version of the original Strategic Defense Initiative, only this would involve actual deployment, not just research and development. So anything, and the Russians and the Chinese leaders have both stated that they consider the Golden Dome a highly destabilizing development, because that strikes at the core of their claim to great power status. If they do not have a nuclear force which can effectively threaten the United States, they are no longer great powers. They are not even second-rate powers. So that is the central contest that is going on there. But in the meantime, Ukraine is in the conventional sphere is certainly moving very swiftly towards being a first-rate military power, at least in land forces. And they are exploring a new field, the use of drones and drone warfare, both offensive and defensive. And they have the strategic initiative in this war with Russia. And they have been steadily increasing the cost to Russia over the past 4 years. And it is not going to get any better for them. So now we have a situation where in the case of Zelensky, it is a contest now of wills, a contest of political will between Zelensky and Putin. And as I have stated many times on this program before, I'm waiting for Zelensky and the Ukrainian military leadership to launch that final decisive blow, in this case in the Crimea, as well combining that as a follow-up to the current offensives in the east, so that once that final counterpunch is thrown, that will be the breaking point for Russian political leadership. And they will, instead of outright suing for peace, they'll just simply, as I've said before, declare victory and go home. They'll get out of there. And then we will have a basis for establishing a genuine peace. Putin will try to pretend to us, well, we've taught Ukraine a lesson. We have accomplished the objectives of our special military operation, when in fact all they've done is just try to paper over a massive military defeat.
Well, interestingly enough, that Putin has not achieved any of his strategic objective regarding Ukraine when he was talking the militarization and setting up a friendly to Russia government and cut Ukrainian defense forces and so he hasn't achieved nothing. But John,
go ahead.
Isn't it true that America and Israel hasn't achieved any single objective in its war against Iran? Because even actually they lost their position, because before the war, Strait of Hormuz was open and everything was working, and now not only that is not working, and the Arab states in the region, they suffered quite a bit. All military U.S. bases were destroyed, 13 bases if I remember. And so what's a great achievement? Right now, Putin said to United States, he made a phone call to Donald Trump and said that any military land-based attack against Iran is completely unacceptable to Russia. And never mind that Trump is torn apart whether to do this attack or not, probably not, because if case of this type of attack, the consequences for the United States and for Donald himself will be atrocious. So where does it end? Where is it all going to, John, in your opinion?
Yeah, this is a contest, just as the war between Russia and Ukraine is a contest of political wills. So now we're witnessing the contest of political wills between the United States leadership and Israeli leadership, and what is left of the Iranian leadership. Because right now, one of their difficulties is they're trying to find what is the real locus of Iranian leadership with which they can negotiate, because several top layers have already been destroyed. And in terms of military power, the Iranians really don't have that much in the way of an effective military anymore. And the blockade is still very much effectively in place. You have the Iranians attempting to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States imposing a counter blockade, preventing oil from moving. So, okay, who's going to reach their threshold of pain first? That's the contest. Who is going? They each have they each are applying pressure against each other in whatever ways they have available, and the United States has a lot more means of inflicting pain on pressure on the Iranian regime. Now the question becomes: okay, who has more staying power? Which side is, as they say, going to cry uncle first? Where say, okay, we've had enough. So this is still in progress, and I am quite certain that and keep in mind also that the United States has an additional step, such as striking Iranian power plants and their desalination plants for water. And Tehran's situation in terms of water has been bad enough. The United States could make it even worse. So right now there are still cards to be played. And is the United States willing to impose the equivalent of a Carthaginian peace on Iran, or as close to a Carthaginian peace as you're going to get? So right now, I do not say that the outcome of a war against Iran is a foregone conclusion. I will say that I do not think that the United States is going to invade the country of Iran itself. That would just be absolute. That would be like as if the United States had tried to go ahead at the end of World War II and invade the Japanese home islands. You get a similar result if the United States tried to invade Iran itself, the mainland of Iran, not the islands. The islands are still an option such as Karg Island or the other islands in the Strait of Hormuz. That is still an option. So I'm curious to see how much political will there is on the part of the United States leadership, political and military, to do this. I mean, certainly the military is making plans for it. The U.S. military always has contingency plans and forces allocated for that purpose. So it just becomes a question of, all right, the military is waiting for the U.S. president to say, okay, go ahead, let's go ahead and do this. So that is what I'm looking in terms of the U.S.-Iran war. It too is a contest of political wills, because as Clausewitz said, war is an extension of politics by other means. So
what's interesting, Jonathan, that U.S. It seems to me, or Donald Trump rather say, is quite happy with today's situation. No war, no peace, and just grind it out until Iran will collapse. No war, no peace is not a new strategy. It was strategy used by Lenin and Trotsky during First World War against German, and there was no peace, no war situation. We know what it was followed by.
Except, except that the only difference between that situation with Lenin and the current situation in the U.S. with Iran, the U.S. is on the strategic offensive. Lenin was on the strategic defensive against Germany, and said no war, no peace. Essentially, the Germans took advantage of that and said, "Okay, we're going to continue to march," until eventually they were forced to sue for peace at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which then enabled the Germans to shift their forces from the Eastern Front to the Western Front and mount one last counteroffensive in the West in March of 1918, which fortunately for the Western Allies failed just barely. But again, the differences in emphasis on who is on the strategic offensive.
It's interesting that Russia at that time was clearly winning the war as partners with Entente, England, and France.
Yeah.
They were on a winning side, and they are, just because they wanted to keep the power of Lenin and Trotsky, they decided to have their own separate peace through strategy, no war, no peace. And okay, they succeeded in that strategy, but they lost the war.
Exactly. Yeah, they got a very I would call a very illusory victory. It was a Pyrrhic victory. They won a victory, but it wasn't worth the cost.
And by the way, Ukrainians suffered as a result of that no war, no peace, because Germans attacked Ukraine and was trying to make it its own. And then Red Army and White Army, they were trying to control Ukraine with different chances for success. But Ukraine was suffering in either case, whether it's German or Red Russians or White Russians. It didn't matter because
this is something that is not very closely studied in the West, and there are a relatively small number of military historians and people of the various military academies, especially the United States Military Academy at West Point. But other than those few who do bother to study those periods of history, it is not that widely studied. And so, therefore, the lessons of that war tend to be ignored or overlooked by military analysts in the West. But the Ukrainians are all too clearly aware of those lessons. And that explains why the Ukrainians are in absolutely no frame of mind to surrender or give an inch to the Russian invaders, because they know what the result of that would be.
You're right, Jonathan, and it's too bad that it's not being really studied, because that would eliminate this position of Russian Ukrainians as the same people, their brothers and sisters and whatever else. That would eliminate this train of thoughts.
The Ukrainians would tell people who make that claim, say, "What are you people smoking? What kind of drugs are you people taking? Don't you even bother to read history?" And unfortunately, the answer would say, "Oh no, we don't think it matters." "Oh yes, it does." And this is something that, fortunately, because of the skill and initiative that Ukrainian military leaders and soldiers have shown in this war, they are now going to be able to, in many ways, dictate. No, I wouldn't say dictate. I would say they would be able to give valuable knowledge and skills to Western militaries in exchange for, greater trade. There will be greater economic opportunities for Ukraine, especially following the end of this war.
And technology transfer.
Yes. And all those things are available to Ukraine now, because they have, in effect, earned the respect of the West by their victories and success against Russia, which had a very inflated reputation of its military until Ukraine shattered that myth and shattered those misperceptions. So right now, Ukraine is in. They have the initiative. They have the Russians back on their heels, and they have the potential again to end this war. They just need to keep pressing. And there's a term in boxing called killer instinct. But how good of a killer instinct does a boxer have? It's very important. When you see that your opponent is weakened or is staggering, it's your ability to just close in and finish the fight, and knock the opponent out. And certain boxers were famous for this. Now,
Mike Tyson, number one.
Mike Tyson. He is Mike Tyson, George Foreman, Joe Frazier. All of them were feared for their killer instinct. Muhammad Ali, interestingly enough, he is not famous for killer instinct, but he is famous for having very great speed, defense, and the ability to control a fight. And in that aspect, he was better than any boxer in history. So there is a case for skilled defense, and he obviously Muhammad Ali was also more intelligent than all of the other boxers that he had to go up with. And this is evident if you study his fights. And just in this case, yeah. Oh, sorry, I had a message from the sideline. That's okay. But in any case, the lesson we can learn here is that there is much to be said for being intelligent, to fighting intelligently and smartly, not just making it a contest of brute force. And Ukraine has done very well in that aspect. And that is why they are winning this war, because they are fighting smarter than the Russians are.
Actually, before we finish, I would like to mention the stature, international stature of Zelensky. Remember the February last year when he was absolutely denounced in the White House, and it was probably one of the lowest points of his presidency. Look at what's happening now. He's addressing now directly both Trump and Putin, and said that he is not interested in any so-called peace proposals until he will see that they are realistic, they are concrete, there's something to be discussed. Otherwise, he doesn't want to waste his time even to look at them. Can you imagine that he would say something a year ago, something like this? Probably not.
Because remember, President Trump declared that, you don't have any cards. And I will almost say with metaphysical certitude that Zelensky was thinking, oh, yes, I do have cards. You just haven't seen them yet.
Okay, now it's a time to show up the cards, and Zelensky has cards to play. What's interesting, by the way, his political situation is much stronger than one of Putin. You know, a lot of people now in Russia, even close to him, they're making public statements that he's not doing enough to win this war. He's not a real leader who Russia needs now, and it's a difficult time or so on. So his political situation is very vulnerable, unlike Zelensky, who is just growing up in his stature. Anyway, that's I would like to thank you for today's discussion. Thank you so much, and we'll see you Friday, same place, same time, and Slava Ukraini.
God bless America.
Героям слава. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.